Today I'm in Kfar Hanassi, which is near the crossroads of Rosh Pina on a shoulder of land overlooking the River Jordan Gorge, and opposite us, with a view from Alec's house, an absolutely spectacular view of the Golan Heights and the extinct volcanoes. Anyway, we'll go straight into this and we'll talk. This is Alec.
Hello.
How do you do, Alec?
How do you do, Aaron?
Okay. How do you do, Aryeh?
Hi everybody.
Okay. So these are two veteran members of Kibbutz Kfar Hanassi.
We're not veteran members.
You're not?
No.
We are Garin.
We're the Garin that came to, what do they say?
Garin.
Came to save the kibbutz.
So you're the Garin in English settlement group
Strengthen the kibbutz.
to reinforce the kibbutz.
Garin Hay it was called.
I see. And what year was that you came here?
I came in 57.
And
57.
I came in 58.
But I'll tell you about that when we talk about how I came to Kwanasi.
Okay.
Because the Garin went to Mayan Tzvi first
Yes.
on Hakshara.
To train as
And
kibbutzniks.
then I took them from there because it was a dead loss anyway. I took them from there to Kwanasi.
Okay, so Alec, let me just start with you, and it's actually a question both to you and Aryeh. Let's go back with Alec to the 1930s and with Aryeh to the 1940s.
Yeah, I had 40s. 1930, I was just born.
Okay. What year were you born?
1930.
Oh, 1930.
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
born in 1934.
1934. Okay. Well, anyway, let's look at that period of time. What was going on with Jewish communities in England at that time? And what was the feeling with regards to Jews coming to then Palestine? Okay.
No, I'm trying to think, Rex, when I joined the movement, put it that way.
When you joined, which movement are we talking
That
about?
was Habonim. It was called
Habonim, which is a Jewish...
Not Habonim Draw.
No,
It was
no.
called Habonim.
Which is a Jewish pioneering youth movement.
That's what it was.
Okay, so you joined Habonim,
I joined
which
Habonim.
means the builders.
The builders, Habonim,
Yeah.
the builders.
Okay.
And I joined in 45, 1945. I was 15.
I see.
I joined the movement in Leeds,
I see.
and I became a member, what was then days called the Sofim. They were Bonim,
A scout.
Sofim, and Batikim.
A scout.
Sofim were the scouts.
Okay, let's try and avoid a little bit of the Hebrew and talk in English because this is going worldwide to people.
Yeah, am I talking in Hebrew?
It's all right. Don't worry about it.
I thought I was
Don't worry about it. We
I was
both
talking
understand.
English, yeah.
We all understand. So you joined Habonim as a youth movement in 1945. Was that during the war or after the war?
45 was before the 6 Day War.
No, I'm talking
before
about the
48
Second World War.
Yeah.
Not the 48 War, the Second World War.
Yeah, no, I was
Okay.
after. It was after because the Second World War.
Ended 1945, I think.
Yeah, it was
in
just at the
Europe,
end
I
of the
think it was
war.
in May, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was the end of the war because
Yeah.
I was at home and we had a shelter which we never used, but never mind.
A Nissen hut. Nissen hut in the garden.
No, I had in the garden a proper shelter with stones. You know, stones with a metal tin
Yeah.
thing inside.
Okay, Aryeh, when did you join the Habonim, the youth movement?
I have to tell you a story before that.
Definitely, I'm all ears.
First of all, you asked a general question about the Jews in England in that period in 1940 in the 1940s. First of all, I was evacuated with tens of thousands of other children from London. I was detached from my parents at the age of 5, and I was sent to a remote place in in Wales, because of the fear of the German attack or the Blitz that would be on London. After 6 months, I returned home, and that's when the Blitz really started, and our house was bombed. When we crawled out of the shelter, which was in the back garden, no house, no street. And we moved to to Bedford, which is 40 miles from London, and overnight a Jewish community was created from the Jews who left London, the Blitz in London, and moved over to Bedford. And we adopted, according to the requests of the leaders of the Jewish community, Jewish refugee boys from the Kindertransport. And one of the children we adopted, I remember, my father spoke to them in Yiddish, and one of them I discovered when I came to Kfar Hanassi was a member of Kfar Hanassi, one of the founding members of Kfar Hanassi. And he was one of the children that my parents adopted in Bedford in 1940.
Wow.
Furthermore, at the end of the war, we returned to London. Before we lived in Stamford Hill, but at the end of the war, we moved over to Finchley. And the Jewish community was rife, and everybody was talking about Palestine, and my father was very involved. He was the head of the Zionist society in Finchley, Kinloss Gardens, Shul, and there were meetings all the time, and in our house, and there was a general atmosphere of and what the British were doing in Palestine. At any rate, I joined I was looking for some kind of social life, and I joined the Jewish Lads Brigade.
Well, ditto. I was also in the Jewish Lads Brigade, but later on, in 1960.
Okay, so in the Jewish Lads Brigade, it came over in the Cheder to try to get kids to join the Jewish Lads Brigade.
Which was basically some form of a Jewish...
Yes.
How can you say...
Well, let me just explain.
Yes.
We spent our time marching up and down.
So did I. So did I.
And the message was to be faithful to the king. It was King George VI, and the British flag.
Yes.
And
yes,
Britain, to be faithful to Britain. That was the name of the game.
I
in the Jewish
remember
Lads
it
Brigade.
well.
There was just one little problem. There were no girls there. And
now, Aryeh, you have put your finger on it.
Now, one day, I was standing by the bus stop, waiting to go to school. I was all of 14 years old, waiting to go to school. And a friend of mine from Cheder, we went to Cheder
the religious study class, yes.
Came past me, and he says, Bert, as I was known then, we've just set up a new group of Habbonim in the sukkah of the shul. How about joining us? I said, what do you do there? He says, well, we talk about what's going on in Palestine, and it was still 1940. It was not quite Israel yet. What was going on in Palestine, and we sing Hebrew songs, and we dance Hebrew dances, and you know, it's really nice there. I said, yeah, sounds okay. I said, any girls there? He says, yes. Wow, I'm coming. You know? And one thing led to another, and here I am in Kfar Hanassi.
So many guys have told me, well, Alec, did you also join Habbonim because of the girls?
I had more or less the same story at the beginning. In 1944, when the Germans were bombing London, they were bombing Leeds, and we were evacuated. I was very fortunate that when we were evacuated, me and two of my cousins were invited to go to a farm And we thought, oh, it sounds very good. Now, I have to remind you that in those days, there was no food.
That's right.
You didn't get eggs and you didn't get
Well,
butter.
in my time after the war, there were food coupons.
You couldn't get
rationing.
So I got
allotments to grow your own vegetables.
Well, I was very fortunate. I was evacuated to a place called Redford, with my brother, and it was a farm.
Uh-huh.
I had eggs as many as I wanted. I had meat as much as I wanted. I didn't eat bacon in those days because I was a Jewish boy.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But we ate everything else. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to school because the school was too far away and they couldn't afford to bring a bus just to pick up two of us. So they said, I'm very sorry, you can't go to school. So we were very upset about that.
How old were you then? You were a young teenager?
Yeah, well, we were 13, 14, 15,
Yeah.
14, 15. So we were carried on in the farm. We worked on the farm. And we picked fruit. And so I spent a whole year there. Very enjoyable.
Wow.
I would have carried on, but my father came along and said, Alec, home. Enough of this messing around. I want you home.
Okay, so now you've touched on something that I wanted to talk about. That people around the world nowadays, they don't know that in those days in Europe and in England, there were actually training farms established, hachsherot, for budding pioneers, young people who wanted to train to be kibbutz members. So in England at that time, as far as I know, I think there were three.
Bosom,
Yeah.
David Eder Farm,
In Sussex.
and that was in
Hurst Grange and Reading.
Hurst Grange, and then Reading.
Yeah. And likewise in Europe, for example, I know before the war, before the Second World War, in Poland and in Russia, Belarus, there were, for example, the other youth movements of Blau-Weiß and Gordonia,
Okay.
and all of those youth movements. They were all over. Now, can you explain to the viewers why were these farms established as training farms? Why were you interested in Palestine?
Because we, at that stage, before the state was declared, if you know.
Yes, before 1948.
We in the movement in Habonim, which was a youth movement, a Jewish youth movement, scouting youth movement, but it was not only scouting, as Aryeh said, it was partly educational as well. And we educated towards the fact that Aliyah, going to Israel, was the final decision what to do. To go to Israel and to live on a kibbutz.
Uh-huh.
That was the secret. So to do that, they said, okay, you have to practice, you have to learn. And that's why they set up the training farm, Hakshirot, as we called them.
Yeah.
And that was to teach you how to farm. By the way, it had nothing to do with Israel, because farming in England's got nothing to do with farming in Israel. She Baruch, obvious. But we learned to farm in England, and that was in preparation to go to Israel to live on a kibbutz as a farmer.
Yep. Okay, Aryeh.
Okay, I was on Hachshara.
On the training farm.
On the training farm. In the movement, we'll start off. In the early days of my movement education activity, I remember we were in our madrich told us about kibbutz.
The youth
The youth leader told us about what kibbutz is. Wow, and I was really turned on. When I came home, my mother asked me, well, how was your meeting? I said, great. And she said, what did you talk about? Talked about this fantastic way of life on a kibbutz. She says, how do you know it's so fantastic? Our madrich said so, our youth leader said it was. And one thing led to another.
So you took it in, hook, line and sinker.
And in a successful member of Habonim was one who, after he finished school, he went on Hachshara, he went on the training farm, not to study. If he went to study, he was considered an educational failure.
Okay, even a traitor.
Yeah, well, and you were to go on the training farm and then go to the kibbutz in Israel.
Okay, Alec.
Now, what was the training farm about? I'd just
Okay,
like to
back to
mention
Aryeh.
that. I went to a year's training. I was so keen that I left school. I left school at the end of before the end of sixth form, and I went to what was called the Hachshat Noah, which is
the youth training farm.
The youth training farm, where we studied half a day and worked half a day. Mm-hmm. We studied history, Zionism, and Jewish history, and learned Hebrew, and all that you needed in order to come to Israel.
Let me ask you a question. Were there many girls there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I was already 17 years old.
Well, you know.
And
the hormones were flying around.
Absolutely. And we learned every morning, and in the afternoon, or sometimes the other way around, we worked in the fields. At the end of the year, we decided what we wanted to do. We weren't obliged to carry on in the movement. Many went to university afterwards. I went on the main training farm in Reading.
Okay, let me just stop you there.
Okay,
Alec wants to say he's got a story here.
Yeah, I want to slightly change what happened. In the early times, which Aryeh talked about, when the movement said you came on Aliyah, you came to the kibbutz, and you worked on the kibbutz. There was a group of people. I'll give you some names which probably people know. Freddie Kahn.
I know the name.
Henry Neer.
I know the name.
And there was me, and there was a bloke from Liverpool who went to America eventually, an architect, engineer.
Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman.
That's it.
I met him 4 or 5 years ago at the reunion.
Oh, yeah?
Because he told me he was together with my brother in that garin.
Well, these people, the 3 or 4, 5 or 6 of us, came to the movement and said, sorry, we want to study. We don't want to go on Hakshara.
For training farm, okay.
To a training farm. And they said, that's not allowed. There was a VEDA, what do you call a VEDA?
A conference.
A conference of the whole, which decided that we can carry on studying, and we did. Henry and Freddie and myself carried on studying and became professionals.
So what did you qualify as?
I was engineering. I was an engineer. Freddie was an architect. Henry was a lecturer on history of some sort. I think so, yeah. Can't remember. And there was another 1 or 2 of us. So we didn't go on Akshara.
Okay, let me just ask you both a question now. At that time, there was still military call-up in England, a draft. And how did you both stand with regards to the draft? Were you called up or what?
I'll tell you the story. The movement saw that problem of people being called up, and we decided to set up a Hakshara in Ireland.
I see.
And they sent me to Ireland. That was my first job in the movement when I sent me to Ireland to set up a Hakshara in Ireland, so that all the people that got called up in England went to Ireland, went to the farming training farm there, and then went on Aliyah.
So that part of Ireland was the state of Ireland away from
that's
Dublin.
It was separate from the United Kingdom.
Yeah, it wasn't Northern Ireland.
So you were a draft dodger.
That's what we were. Exactly what we were.
You were a draft dodger.
But
okay.
What happened when I eventually got the farm and I set it up, the English government decided to cancel call-up. I soaked the farm.
So you didn't sit in prison or anything like that?
I came back to England. Yeah.
Aryeh, you wanted to say something?
I was also due for draft, but I managed to be deferred because of my eyesight.
You know, Aryeh, this is what I wondered about you. Both of you don't wear spectacles, and I do, and I am, I don't know, 16 years younger than you. Okay. So you got out of it.
And I managed to get deferred from the army.
Okay,
I got out of it because I went to Ireland, came back, and the movement asked me to work full time in the movement.
As a movement worker.
And I became what was called in those days Rosh Sofim.
The head of the Scouts age group.
And my wife was a head, not wife, she was my girlfriend in those days, was head of the Bonim, which were the youngsters.
The Bonim were probably the 14 and 16.
14 to 16.
Yes.
Yeah. And Max Mader, our close friend, was head of the senior members.
I see.
The Vatikim.
Okay, let's just... all right.
I'd also like to add that I was sent, after I was on the training farm for a year in Reading, where I worked very hard on an outside farm. Got up 5 o'clock in the morning, cycled 5 miles in order to get to the farm, worked all day, came home at 4 or 5 in the evening after a full day's work, and afterwards we were active in the training farm with all sorts of activities.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because the training farm wasn't just physical training as farmers, but it was living in a mini kibbutz.
Absolutely. Now,
Socialism.
So much so, I want to tell you a little story, if I may. So much so, there were 28 members, and it was, we lived exactly according to the kibbutz idea of from each according to ability to each according to his needs, which was the Marxist approach, and equality all the way along. And I wanted to go to my parents' silver wedding in London, which was 40 miles away from the training farm. And I had to bring it up to the general meeting in order for them to discuss the matter and decide whether I may or may not go to London.
How many were you in
28.
And in those days?
And I brought it up to the general meeting. I brought it up to the Maskir, to the secretary, and it came to the general meeting. They decided, majority vote, that Bert cannot go to London to his parents' silver wedding, because when he is eventually in Israel on a kibbutz, he won't be able to go to any family activities.
Well, there's a logic there.
So he should get used to it now.
Well, you know, fair is fair.
So just
I would like to add to that, because what Aryeh said was quite right. When I was in England, my brother got married, and I wanted to go to the wedding in England to see my brother.
What year was that?
And that was in 58. 59.
Wow, you've hit on something here. Go on, carry on.
And so the kibbutz says, you haven't got your tour. There was a rota system.
Yes.
Your name is not yet on the rota. You can't go and see your brother's the wedding.
And the reason behind that was both socialism, you have to wait in the queue,
yes,
and probably they didn't have the money.
Yeah, that was one of the other items as well. But even then, my brother was willing to pay for I think like Aryeh's parents were willing to pay for whatever he wanted. But that wasn't the problem for us. It was a problem of principle. There's a rota system. You abide by the rota. That's what the kibbutz does. You don't go to see your brother's wedding. What can I do?
Okay, well, I'll just turn the camera around on myself now. And I said that I had the same thing in 1957. I was a little boy in Liverpool.
Lower yourself.
Which one? Am I on now?
That's better.
Okay. And my brother, who was in the settlement group in the Kibbutz Amiad not far from here, he got married. 3 couples got married on that day. And my father was a greengrocer in Liverpool, and we didn't have the money to fly to Israel to the kibbutz for his wedding. And in those days, flying was a luxury. It wasn't like it is today. All right, that's my story. Now back to you.
Take a boat.
Take a boat, yeah, and come about a month after the wedding.
Yeah, those were things which were part of life, which we accepted. Again, Aryeh and myself, we were members of a movement which demanded lots and lots of principles, which we abided by them. And we abided by them not because we were forced to by the law. We did it because we felt that was the right thing to do. And we ended up, of course, going on kibbutz in the end. And I'll talk about going on the kibbutz later on when you want.
All right, we'll get there. So in fact, you were socialists, that you accepted decisions made by the majority group.
That was the idea.
That was the idea.
Okay.
And we must not forget that we were also Zionists.
Yes.
And we were Jews and Zionists, and we were very much influenced by the events of that period, which, of course, very strong in the background was the Holocaust.
That's
and I will never forget when we were in Bedford during the war, and we received these Jewish refugee boys, and they related their story of how and why they left. And that made a very, very strong impression on me.
These Jewish refugee boys from the Kinder Transport, they came before the war, and then afterwards you found out about the Holocaust.
That's right.
How did you find out about the Holocaust? What did you hear? What did you know?
Next, where we lived in Bedford, I was all of 6-7 years old at the time. A Jewish family, refugee family from Czechoslovakia, succeeded in leaving Czechoslovakia and coming to England, and they related their story. And this was my first meeting, or my first, you can say, meeting with the Holocaust. Because they related what went on in Czechoslovakia when the Germans invaded, and why they pulled out and came to Britain. And that made a tremendous impression on me.
I had the same feeling, the same impression, obviously. I was fortunate that there was what we called the shaliach, translated
An envoy. Representative.
That was
Emissary.
a gentleman called Shmuel Chatzor, who was then sent to Europe. He was also in charge of sending people to Russia, by the way, or taking people from Russia out. But he told the story. He was the one who gave me personally the story about the Holocaust. He lived through it. He was in Germany. He was a German boy. I think he came on the kindergarten.
And it was his brother we adopted in Bedford.
Joseph Katzor.
Joseph Katzor.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think he came on the kindergarten transport, but his knowledge of the Holocaust was very close because he was involved in running a department in the Israeli government which dealt with Holocausts. And so we learned a lot about the Holocaust. And for us, I don't know about Aryeh, for me, hearing the stories which about, what happened about the Jews was a tremendous, I should say, shaping of my life in the future. That's what gave me the urge to do something which was different. I wanted to go to Israel and get back what they took from Jews at the time.
Yes.
And that was one of the reasons why I became an Aliyah, by the way.
Well, again, all I can say is ditto. I discovered the Holocaust when I was about 10 in the mid-50s, and that for me was an emotional turning point.
No, exactly.
I was 5, 6, 7 when I first heard about this. We met the victims of the early victims of the Holocaust who became refugees. They were fortunate enough to be able to leave, and their stories made a tremendous impression on me when I was a kid. I was 5, 6, 7. And I didn't talk about going to Israel. I didn't know what that was all about, but the Holocaust made a tremendous impression on me. And it eventually led me to do what I did, leave the Jewish Lads Brigade and join Abonim.
Okay, so let's look at the period after the Second World War, 1945 to the establishment of the state, when there was 1940, there was a turmoil in the country. The British government, the British mandate was governing Palestine, was caught in the middle between the Jewish national identity and the Arab national identity, and all three parties were in conflict.
I could only remember about that. I was also very young. I was 15, 16. But I was very much, I think, impressed by the trauma of the Holocaust. But there was a gentleman in those days in England called Mosley. Mosley was a German.
No, I think he was German. He was very English.
Arthur Mosley.
Yeah, he was English.
Oswald Mosley.
Oswald.
He was very English.
He led this whole German movement.
The black shirts.
And the black shirts. And I remember
the fascist black shirts. Yeah.
I remember as a kid marching through Leeds, not to London so much. In London there was as well. I remember marching as Jews to Leeds against Mosley and his party, black shirts. I remember that as a tremendous trauma to make me feel, what am I doing with my life? Something's missing. I was only 15, by the way, 16. And then I went to university.
It's a very important age. It's a watershed age.
I was impressed. I'd probably say, imbued by the whole pressure of Nazism, Holocaust, Aliyah, to going to Israel and settling in the country on a kibbutz. It never entered our minds we were going to settle anywhere else but on a kibbutz and be a farmer. That was it.
Okay, Aryeh?
Yeah, I remember the headlines in the newspapers of what the Jewish terrorists were doing to British soldiers, and to see this British soldier hanging.
The three sergeants.
And a picture of them. And I was at school, and I remember the anti-Semitism it aroused at school. All this had an effect on me. And while I was in the Jewish Lads Brigade, and I must repeat the Jewish Lads Brigade again, no mention was made of what's going on in Palestine. No mention was made of the Holocaust. And it was all to be faithful to the British flag and the king, etc., etc.
So this makes me ask the question, was the youth movement of Habonim a minority reaction of young Jews, whereas the majority of Jewish youth were looking in other directions?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
It's difficult to answer because I was, it affected me particularly, and I joined Habonim, but why I joined Habonim, I didn't directly look for a youth movement. As it so happened, the occasion rose when I was standing at a bus stop.
Hormones pushed you in that direction.
That's right. Oh, exactly, the hormones. But I think had that not been so, I would have looked for a way of expressing my...
I think you have to remember, by the way, in those days, Habonim had, I think, I wouldn't say it was legally, but there were 3,000 to 4,000 youth in the movement. And that was one of the biggest youth movements in the Jewish youth movements in the country. There was YPZ, there was Hashomer Tzeir had their youth movement, B'nai Akiva had their youth movement,
religious youth movement.
and they all had youth movements, but the biggest by far at the time was Habonim. And I think it was because the fact that we educated towards a much more wider scope, settling in the country on a kibbutz was much wider than being on a religious kibbutz, but the religious kibbutzim were no worse, or no better. They were just as bad. But we came to the kibbutz because that was the accepted thing to do. And we didn't argue about it. And when we came, I remember I came as an engineer. And now we can talk a bit about how...
All right, we'll get on to that. One last thing here.
I recall now that the movement and the youth movement were very much in the minority. We're mentioning them as though they were the leading lights of the period. Not so. They were very, very minority. What was the majority of youth were not in Zionist movements at all. They were in youth clubs. Youth clubs where they did dancing and social, all sorts of social activities, but nothing educational or Jewish or Zionist. No mention. And Habonim, I remember, had to compete with these social clubs, youth clubs. The youth clubs were girls and ballroom dancing and
girls,
etc. And with them we had to compete. That I remember. And Habonim was very much in the minority, together with B'nai Akiva and whoever. Shomer Hatzair.
I don't agree with Aryeh at all. In those days, Habonim was practically in numbers, numerically, one of the strongest movements in the country. Even the Boys Brigade, or the Boy Scouts, for example, which were very, very much involved, Jewish Boy Scouts, had large numbers, but they weren't as much involved as we were in Habonim. In Habonim, we had meetings, how many? 3 times a week. 4 times a week we had a meeting. The Boy Scouts met once a week, maybe on Sunday or something, So the intensity of Habonim was much more powerful.
We took a break at this point. Alec, Aryeh and I talked for another 2 hours. Part 2 of this conversation is the next episode called Fish and Chicks. They talked about arriving at Kfar Hanassi in the late 50s and where they worked. You'll enjoy it. Some funny stories about working in the fish ponds and with chickens. I'll upload it around about the 27th of April. Due to the length of our meeting, I may decide to divide the remainder of the footage into 1 or 2 last episodes in which we deal with aspects of recent changes in Kfar Hanassi. So keep well, look after yourselves, and be good to others. Bye for now. Shalom and lehitraot.